Hello everyone. Upcoming next, we have Juliette to introduce the East End of Toronto.
But the East End of Toronto tends to be more affordable, really, is what it comes down to. So when I'm talking about the East End of Toronto, I'm not only talking about those more affluent, established neighborhoods like Leslieville and Riverdale and Plater Estates and Danforth, like Greektown. Everybody is familiar with Greektown. It's pretty much an international destination. But I'm also talking about some really fantastic neighborhoods for investors and new families who are buying their first home or moving out of a condo. We're talking about neighborhoods like Woodbine Lumsden, Danforth East, Old East York, those type of neighborhoods, and even going as far out to as Maine and Danforth is a really hot area right now.
你而家收睇嘅係加拿大財經一號電視台。
嘉國地產發展趨勢，近期樓市最新動態，地產行業權威發布，眾多專家分析點評，盡在置業加國。Hello everyone. Upcoming next, we have Juliette to introduce the East End of Toronto. Hi Juliette.
你好 Jackie.
Thank you. It's your first time joining us, so
Yes.
why don't you give us a brief introduction about yourself?
Oh, for sure. My name is Juliette Fergus. I'm with Trust Realty Group. That's a team with Keller Williams Referred Urban out of Toronto. I think it's very important in this day and age with so many real estate agents on the market. We all have to have a specialty, a niche. My specialty is being an expert in the Danforth East market. Now what that means, I make every attempt to see every home that comes on the market from Monarch Park to Maine so that I can really feel the homes and know what they're worth before any other agent would know what they're worth. Now, I don't define Danforth East as just being that geographic area. Really anything east of the Don Valley Parkway, I'm very, very familiar with.
From last episode, we heard an agent talking about the advantage of the west end of the city, but we want to hear from your side. What do you say the biggest advantage of the east end?
Oh, well, the east end and the west end are completely different. We are part of Toronto. We are a cohesive whole in Toronto, but the east end of Toronto tends to be more affordable, really, is what it comes down to. So when I'm talking about the east end of Toronto, I'm not only talking about those more affluent, established neighborhoods like Leslieville and Riverdale and Plater Estates and Danforth, like Greektown. Everybody is familiar with Greektown. It's pretty much an international destination. But I'm also talking about some really fantastic neighborhoods for investors and new families who are buying their first home or moving out of a condo. We're talking about neighborhoods like Woodbine Lumsden, Danforth East, Old East York, those type of neighborhoods, and even going as far out to as Maine and Danforth is a really hot area right now.
Could you brief tell us what's the top 3 advantage of the whole east end of the city?
My pleasure. So number 1 has to be our access to transportation. I mean, Toronto, there's so many lists that I'm so proud of Toronto being on, you know, world class this, world class that. The one that made my heart hurt a little bit is that we're one of the worst with traffic. So the east end of Toronto is really an advantageous location because we can hop on the Don Valley Parkway and make it pretty quickly and easily to the Gardiner Expressway, which is our main east-west route in the south, and the 401, which is our main east-west route in the north. If cars aren't your thing, there's a large number of people in Toronto who survive just fine without driving because we do have a really great transit system. I know when I'm waiting for a train that is broken down, I don't feel that it's a really great transit system, but overall it gets you where you need to go very affordably and very quickly. And part of the beauty of Danforth East is that you're right on the subway line. I have lived places where you're on a streetcar line or a bus line. Once you've lived on a subway line in the middle of February when it's -30 and it's snowing outside, you really appreciate the convenience of being able to seek that shelter, and the subways aren't held up as much as streetcars or buses would be in the weather. So that would be my number 1 is transportation. Number 2 would be our trails and recreation. Like we have so many resources. You could do something different with your family every day of the week. To the south, we have the beaches. So there's Ashbridges Bay, Woodbine, Balmy Beach, Kew Beach. I might be forgetting a beach, but all interconnected. There's over at least 10K of trails that you can access, and there's little parkettes and playgrounds. It's all very family oriented. To the north, we have Taylor Creek Trail. You can use the bike trails that are in that park. Not to mention they're absolutely stunning. It's like being in Northern Ontario. You can use them to interconnect to the Don Valley Trail and bicycle practically your entire way to work.
It's like enjoy vacation every day.
Exactly, exactly. I run a walking group on Saturdays in my community, and we often go up there, and it's just beautiful. So that would be the trails and recreation. And then we come to community. Toronto is a melting pot, and that's why so many people are comfortable when they first immigrate to Toronto. And I would say having, I know all of Toronto, nowhere is this more apparent than Danforth East. Sure, we have your traditional European communities, like everybody thinks Danforth, they think Greek, and they're still there. There's also a very large Sicilian community. We were a very large Sicilian settlement when Italian people were first coming over. That's a little bit further east. But we're also seeing, restaurant-wise, you'll see everything from Turkish to Ethiopian to Japanese to Hakka to different types of Chinese cuisine. It's just amazing what kind of cultures you see. Also, there's the community associations that do so much to make the community feel like a community. I have to mention the Danforth East Community Association. They're a group of volunteers who put on events at our local park, East Lynn Park, throughout the year. That includes farmers markets. We put on the second largest outdoor arts fair in the second weekend of September every year, and that's right behind the one that's held at City Hall every year. So this is a huge achievement for this community group to put on these type of cultural events.
As the location, education is another very important factor for people choosing a different house, right? So how is the school system at the east end of the Toronto?
Well, I'm happy you asked. The east end of Toronto, because it's an area very much in transition, we have some really stellar, really great schools, but there's some areas of opportunity too. But before I get into that, I think it's important that we all understand how the school structure in Toronto works. So there's the public system, there's the separate system, which is also a publicly funded system, but is geared toward Catholics, and then there's the private system. So when I was doing some research for this episode, I wanted to make sure I was giving you accurate data. In all of the East End, the highest ranking Fraser Institute score, and I welcome you to Google that. They're a third party that rates schools in Toronto and gives them a score out of 10 based on their education status and how good of a school they are. The number one came up being Pape Junior School, which I was a little bit surprised about. Having been born and raised in the East End of Toronto, that whole area was very much in transition when I was growing up 30 years ago. But now it's the owner of the number one spot in the East End with a score of 9.1. The school I was expecting to hear in that top spot is Jackman. We hear about the Jackman School District quite a bit, but it slid down the ratings just a little bit to 7.9. Still a very respectable score, but it wasn't where I thought it would be. Because we're focusing on the East End as a whole, as you move east, the highest rated score around Coxwell would be Earl Beatty. So now if we're looking at the separate system, which again is the Catholic system, the two highest rated schools are Holy Name and Canadian Martyrs, both coming in at 7.8, very respectable scores. And I'd like to point out that these are smaller school communities. So we're looking at about 250 to 300 kids in each of these schools. The highest ranking Catholic school with a larger populace is the school I'm most familiar with because my children go there. It has a population of 650 students. St. Bridget's rates at a 6.9, and each year their score is coming up a little bit. Of note is that they have a great program for children with special needs and autistic students, which is very important in this day and age, especially with a lot of children being diagnosed on the spectrum. Private school-wise, we have not a lot of options right in the East End, but we have some accessible options. We have Branksome All-Girls School, which takes kids from JK right through to grade 12. That's just by Sherbourne and Bloor, so just slightly outside of the area, and I'm sure busing arrangements can be made. We also have the male equivalent being Crestview School, I believe, and that takes kids, boys from grade 3 right through to 12. Now, as the kids get a little older, what I'm noticing, and I'll get into this in some of our future questions, I'm sure, but as the area is transitioning from being an older European community to a younger new family community, we don't have a lot of kids who are at the high school age yet. We have a lot just on that cusp and just entering high school. And I'm finding that our educational scores for high schools reflect this. Sorry, the area I didn't touch on was the younger children. The younger children, maybe before the JK age, you want to have them in a daycare or a Montessori type situation. We have fantastic Montessoris. This is where we shine in the East. And again, I think it's reflective of the age of the children and how passionate parents are passionate about whatever age group their children are in. So because we have so many children in that younger age group, we have a lot of great resources for the younger kids. There's Vert Casa Montessori at St. Clair and O'Connor that I would like to just call out. They're a tremendous value and have a great French program right from that age of 2 years onwards, which is fantastic. As well, there's Victoria Education Center, which is right on Woodbine. I don't know, some of your viewers may be familiar with it because they have a Chinese cultural and language program right from a very early age as well.
Wow, if I don't know, you are working for the Realty. I was thought you work for the Ontario Education Board.
Yeah,
you really know this
when you
scope.
think about it though, that's one of the number one questions. Whenever because we're such a community of people with young families moving in, these have to be the answers that I have right away. Yeah.
So we gather all of the information about the areas and the very comprehensive education system. So how is the market doing around the East End for the past 2 years?
For the past 2 years, so Danforth East, again, we have so many neighborhoods in that area. You could be talking about anything from the $3 million homes in Plater Estate to the older condominiums around Sunrise, closer to Eglinton, that are selling for about $250,000. So it's so diverse that I really had to drill down, and I tried to pick 3 neighborhoods that I thought your viewers might be most interested in, because they aren't at the far end of transition. They aren't too much of a gamble, but they're a really good investment in my opinion right now. So I focused on Old East York. Old East York, the price of the average price of a house right now is about $950. The home values in Toronto have been going up 6 to 8%. I mean, who's going to say no to that? I challenge you to find a bank investment that has been performing as well. You're going to hear a lot in the news about how it's turned into a buyer's market, et cetera. We're not seeing that quite yet. The summer is always traditionally very slow. It's always very slow. Look at 10 years back in data. Sales always drop off in the summer. It just so happens that this year we had those government announcements in the April timeframe. It's my personal opinion that people didn't fully understand the announcements. They understood that the government was interfering, and people became scared and held off. So we foresee that those prices will start to rise, maybe get up to the 9-10% again in September. So that is the Old East York. Danforth proper, which is what people think of as Greektown, again, we're looking at the $950. Now, as you go east, we hit a natural divide. The divide that I consider being where the prices go up right now is Woodbine. The average home price east of Woodbine is currently $750. As you go a little bit further east, after Maine, the prices are closer to $700, even $650 if you're looking for the right deal. So why is this happening, that 200,000 drop between Coxwell and Woodbine? I would argue it's because of our aging population on the east side of Woodbine. As the owners of those old bungalows are deciding it's time to move into retirement, maybe I need a home, or unfortunately maybe there's an estate sale and the family is liquidating the property, builders are coming in for the most part, sometimes it's families, but builders are coming in for the most part, scooping up those homes that have the knob and tube, the asbestos, the galvanized plumbing, all of those things, all of those issues that you and I buying a home would want to avoid. Builders don't care, because they're going to be putting a new construction in that spot. So I see this happening every day where I live. I live in Woodbine, Lumsden. There's a new construction happening every block. As those new constructions are finalized and they go on the market, we're going to start to see the Woodbine, Lumsden house prices start to rise. When I looked back for the purposes of our time today, The prices in Danforth East between June of 2015 and 16 went up 15 to 18% depending on the neighborhood. So that's, when you look at the past 2 years, you'd be hard-pressed to find an area where your money would have increased as fast.
Now we know all of this really good advantage about this whole area. Do you have any suggestions for our viewer to invest or buy?
This is a great question. The East End of Toronto is just ripe and waiting for investors. Please don't discount the East End of Toronto. I would say that the most lucrative areas for investment would still be looking at those old bungalows from Woodbine to Main, even a little bit east of Main, because the trend there is purchasing them. They're going for, depending on the state of the house, you can scoop one up right now for about $650,000. That's as of today's date, July 26, 2017. And by investing in consulting with the correct professionals, you can find out exactly how much you can renovate the property so that you don't need to go to the Committee of Adjustments to get those really expensive permits, and you're not held up time-wise because sometimes those permits take a long time to be issued. So that's something you might want to consider. Alternatively, there is no other spot in Toronto that has such a booming upcoming condo market. And what's beautiful about this is that they aren't your high-rises that you see in downtown Toronto. All of the projects that I'm seeing coming on board are mid-rise projects. We're looking at a lot of townhouse condo complexes that are built with a community in mind. There was recently one that completed within the last 5 years called the Carmelina Lofts. That's right at Woodbine and Danforth on Danforth. And in many ways, that was our first one, our guinea pig, we call it in English, to see how the condo market would be accepted. And it's done considerably well. When units were being purchased, a 2-bedroom was going for $350. They're now reselling for in the $550, $600 mark, and that's about 5 years. We recently sold out. There's a project called On the Danforth, which is on the Danforth, and it recently sold out. That's just a little bit further east again, on the Danforth. We are seeing, if you're willing to take a little bit more of a gamble, again, every few years, that eastern boundary of where how far east people are willing to go gets pushed out a little bit further. So there's some really exciting projects that are just now about to break ground at Danforth Road and Danforth Avenue. There's Spice condos that come to mind. There's a project called Danforth Road. There's countless other mid-rise developments happening along Kingston Road, Queen Street East, Victoria Park. I'm sure I'm missing some, but I encourage you, a quick Google would bring up just a multitude of options.
Thank you so much, Juliette. You really helped us and our viewers to know better about the East End of Toronto.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining us.
谢谢。
嘉国地产发展趋势，近期楼市最新动态，地产行业权威发布，众多专家分析点评，尽在置业嘉国。